Hello there, I'm Robert McKay. The channel, as you saw, is Whiskey for Beginners. Beginners? I can tangle my tongue in my teeth just like anybody else, if not better. I am in the midst, at the beginning, not even in the midst, of redoing my entire Whisky Basics playlist. If you have come to this playlist because of something I said in a video referring you to a video in that playlist and you don't find it, the reason is somehow, and I don't know how, I wound up deleting the whole thing and I'm having to re-record every single video. The upside is that as thoroughly amateur as you see they are, they're better than they were. So I have 36 videos to re-record. If I do one a day, record it and upload it, one a day, that's still over a month of work to replace what somehow I accidentally did. I have here in my hot little hand a glass I've been drinking on. You can tell that. It contains Old Grandad 114, which is a bourbon whiskey. And that brings me to the question I want to address in this video. What kinds of whiskey are there? Now, you can classify things in different ways. I have a personal classification system which nobody else uses, which probably would not make any headway anywhere with anybody. But I go by the dominant grain. So you have corn whiskey, whiskey which is mostly corn. Wheat whiskey, which is mostly wheat. Barley whiskey, which is mostly barley, etc., etc., etc. Under the corn whiskey category, you get what American law calls corn whiskey. You get bourbon whiskey, various things. But the categories that generally are in use, if not universally, are different. And I want to talk about them. I mentioned this as bourbon whiskey. Let me say right here, don't ever ask what's the difference between bourbon and whiskey. That's like asking, what's the difference between a thoroughbred and a horse? Or what's the difference between a Ford and a car? A thoroughbred is a horse. A Ford is a car. Bourbon is whiskey. And here's a bottle. It's a Rebel Distillers Collection. I didn't realize it at the time I bought it, but this is a Total Wine store pick. And they did a good job. It's good stuff. But I want to point here. It is Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. It says right on the label of every bourbon bottle that I've ever seen, bourbon whiskey. Just like there are the other varieties. You have this whiskey, that whiskey, bourbon whiskey. Bourbon is one of the main kinds of whiskey that there is. Now, what is bourbon? Under American law, it has to be made in the United States. Now, that requirement only goes back to 1964. So on my 4th birthday, it was legal to make bourbon anywhere in the world and call it bourbon. And then in the summer of that year, the law took effect, and now if you make it outside the United States, you cannot legally call it bourbon. Now, somebody might do that, but he can't sell it in the United States. The law would prevent that. Bourbon whiskey must be at least 51% corn. It must age in a new charred oak barrel. It must come off the still at no more than 160 proof. It must go into the barrel at no more than 125 proof. And I can't remember if I mentioned this, so if I'm repeating myself, I apologize. It must age in a new charred oak barrel. The law says container for various practical reasons. It's always a barrel. It must go into the bottle at no less than 80 proof. When you comply with all those requirements, then you can call it bourbon whiskey. Now, Congress, in passing that law in 1964, rightly described bourbon as America's native spirit, or to put it more correctly, the native spirit of the United States. America stretches from the Arctic Ocean down to Tierra del Fuego. It includes various countries: Chile, Mexico, Canada, Guatemala. Every single country in that span is part of America. The United States is one country in America. And I can't remember where I was going with that. So, that's one kind of whiskey, bourbon whiskey. Next, there's what American law designates as corn whiskey. This is a bottle of Baby Blue from Balcones Distilling in Waco, Texas. And it is, according to the label, straight corn whiskey. Now, Baby Blue, until I bought this bottle, I had never seen it as straight whiskey. Now, straight whiskey is a purely American designation. It means it's at least 2 years old, has no artificial colors, no artificial flavors, and is made, aged, and bottled in a particular state, in this case, Texas. If straight whiskey is at least 2 years old, has to be at least that, but less than 4 years old, it must have an age statement. After 4 years, straight whiskey does not need to have an age statement, but it can. And that applies to every kind of American whiskey, that straight whiskey designation and the requirements. But corn whiskey must be at least 80% corn, and it must age in either new uncharred barrels or used charred barrels. And most distilleries that make corn whiskey do it as a minor detail alongside the bourbon operation, and so they just reuse the bourbon barrels to age the corn whiskey. Now, if you've been tracking things, you'll see that you can use the exact same mash bill to make corn whiskey and bourbon whiskey. This is 100% roasted Texas blue corn. If Balcones wanted to, they could make a run of this mash bill, take half of it over here and put it in brand new charred oak barrels, take this half over here, put it in used charred barrels, or just reuse the bourbon barrels. This would be bourbon, this would be corn whiskey, the only difference being the barrels. If it's under 80% corn, you cannot make corn whiskey with it. It's bourbon, even though the dominant grain is still corn. Next, I have a bottle of Sagamore Spirit Double Oak Rye Whiskey. You can probably guess the percentage of rye that must be in the mash bill. 51%. It must age in new charred oak barrels, and otherwise it must comply with all other rules. If it's going to be straight whiskey, it has to comply with those rules, for instance. Sagamore Spirit comes from Maryland. The Rebel, by the way, is from Kentucky. I mentioned the Baby Blue is from Texas. This is from Maryland. And it has, I think, about the prettiest bottle there is. Sagamore Spirit does. But at least when it's full, to pour it, you have to kind of hold it like this, or anyway I do. This way is not as secure. And there are other kinds of whiskey besides bourbon, rye, corn whiskey. You can have wheat whiskey, which has to be 51% or more wheat. There's a distillery down in Louisiana makes rice whiskey. As far as I know, it's all 100% rice. And I don't know that the government has ever officially defined rice whiskey. But if they ever do, it will surely be at least 51% rice. I've never seen the Mellick. It's not around here. I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And because of the way distribution works, there are a lot of places which will have all of the basics: Jim Beam, Maker's Mark, Knob Creek, Jack Daniels. They'll be there. But other distilleries, like for instance Sagamore Spirit, might not have distribution in all 50 states. Balcones is, at least in my mind, notorious for having spotty distribution, even though Diageo bought them a couple of years ago. Diageo being one of the half dozen or so, I think it is, international spirits conglomerates that own most of the distilleries. I don't know how I got on that, but there are other types of whiskey. There's Scotch. Now, the Scottish never refer to themselves as the Scotch. They'll say they're Scots. S-C-O-T-S. Scots. Not Scotch, Scots. How good my Scottish accent is, I don't know, but I would not want to bet on it being good. If you ever want to lose money, bet on it being a good Scottish accent. But Scotch has its own rules, Scottish rules. You have to make it and bottle it in Scotland. If you make it, age it, put it in a tote, ship it across the ocean, bottle it here, legally it's not Scotch, even though nothing that happened outside of Scotland affects the character of the whiskey. Just like bourbon, you have to make it in the United States. Scotch, you have to make it in Scotland. And there are various varieties of Scotch, and I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to try to give you all the details. There are 4 or 5 whiskey regions in Scotland. Islay is the one that's most noted for being a peated whiskey. They have a single malt, as they call it, which is 100% barley from one distillery. You have blended malt, which is 100% barley but blended from different distilleries. There's grain whiskey, which is anything other than barley. Blended grain whiskey, blended Scotch, which will have some of that barley whiskey and some grain whiskey. Irish whiskey is similar. They have some other rules which to me are so esoteric I can't keep track of them. Scotland mostly uses column stills. Ireland mostly uses pot stills. And that has an effect under the various rules. But, excuse me, aside from the peat, which is not in every Scottish whiskey, just some, I can't tell the difference by taste between Scottish and Irish. Those who know the two types surely can, because there are differences. India makes whiskey. Now, the only Indian whiskey I've had was a sample of Paul John Nirvana. Beautiful whiskey. I loved it. And I decided someday I would get me a bottle. Well, when I was ready to get me a bottle, suddenly I can't find it anywhere in Albuquerque. There is other Indian whiskey from Paul John and others, but I want the Nirvana, and I can't find it. Maybe it'll be back. Japan makes whiskey, and I've never had Japanese whiskey. I would presume that it is very similar, at least in some ways, to Scotch, because the guy who started the whiskey industry in Japan, I don't know his name. I've heard it many times, I just don't remember it. He went to Scotland and learned how to make whiskey there, brought those methods back to Japan and implemented them there. And of course, over time, there were alterations and variations because Japan is a different country from Scotland. And various other countries make whiskey as well. There's a category, the government just recently instituted it officially, called American Single Malt. Not single malt. It is single malt. 2 words. Y'all people need to quit talking so fast. You're ruining the sound of what you're saying. You know, you hear about homes. No, homes. And really, houses. Drones. No. Drones. Talk right. Quit trying to break the speed of light with your jaw jacking. Single malt. Now that means the same thing here as it does in Scotland. 100% barley mash bill, 1 distillery. What I would like to see American distillers do is with that is the same thing they've done with corn and rye and everything else. Innovate. Don't just slavishly use European terminology. Don't just slavishly use the 100% barley mash bill. What would a whiskey be like if it was, just for instance, 75% barley, 20% rye, and 5% corn? What would that taste like? Well, we'll never know as long as everybody's focused on American single malt. But if I was running a distillery, I would be playing with that. I would try different percentages of various grains. You know, MGP, the big contract and source distiller in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, has a 95.5 rye mash bill, 95% rye, 5% barley. Well, what would it be like to reverse that? 95% barley, 5% rye. Why didn't somebody try this stuff? But no, everybody's into American single malt. You know, how pretentious can you get anyways? Be American, okay? We got away from the UK for good and sufficient reasons. Let's not go crawling back and kiss Charlie III's feet, okay? Let's be American. Innovate. Experiment. Who knows what you can do with barley? I'm trying to think if there are any other categories of whiskey. There is one. It's just American whiskey. It doesn't fit into any of the other categories. For instance, if you are doing a 50% corn and 50% rye mash bill, I don't know if anybody's doing that. But if you're doing that, it's not bourbon whiskey, but it's not rye whiskey either. It is just American whiskey. Or if you're doing a mash bill, 25% corn, 25% wheat, 25% rye, 25% barley. That is an American whiskey. And there's nothing wrong with the category. I mean, bourbon and corn whiskey and rye and all that are American whiskeys, but it's so broad that it can encompass anything just about. And I believe that pretty well covers it for my purposes. If you are not familiar with the niche this channel fills, goes back to 2021 when I was just starting to drink whiskey. I wanted to learn things about what I was finding myself involved in. But I couldn't find it all in one place. I couldn't find it all in 5 places. I had to hunt here and hunt there, and I'd find one bit here and one bit there. And I started this channel to take all the stuff I wanted in one place and couldn't find in one place and put it in one place. But that means it's basic information. It's intended for people new to whiskey. I can't say I'm new anymore, not after drinking it for years, but I remember back then. I wanted to know this, I wanted to know that, and I couldn't find it all together. So that's what I'm trying to do, is put it all together. So this is the 3rd video of the Whisky Basics playlist that I am, with great frustration, reconstructing. I was going to do selected ones. Now I got to do the whole deal, 36 videos. And I got to pour me just a little bit of whiskey so I can toast y'all to end the video. One thing is that I didn't know for a while how to end a video on that original playlist, but now I have figured things out. I'm a little less thoroughly amateur. So to end the video, I've been doing Southern, but I want to give me a little variety here. I'm going to go Scottish. Sláinte.